Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Shark Kinney, your host and Chief Shark Officer. If you've been listening for any significant amount of time to this show, even dating back to the very first episode, which was on this subject, then you should know about my love for today's topic, and that's TV. But for marketers today trying to figure out what works, how to measure what works across channels and devices, and find an audience that thinks your ads are contextually relevant and as well drive growth, well, for most, it's a misunderstood channel that needs better data to make more informed decisions that work together in a rhythm with all your marketing and advertising efforts. Ashwin Navin is the CEO and co-founder of the team building the future of TV data and audience analytics at Samba TV. And on this episode, we'll discuss TV, the state of measurement, the harmony and rhythm of connecting devices together across channels and platforms from search to social to TV. Walled gardens, Brazilian music, Mako sharks, an Oakland Raider who should or should not be in the Hall of Fame, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a Samba TV CEO with a shark que gosta de samba on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Ashwin, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would, tell us a little bit about your career and your own personal story.
Hey, Kenneth, it's good to be on your show, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I know we run across each other at industry events, and it's an honor to be here. My background is that I started this company 12 years ago. I've always been drawn to starting companies. I guess in my professional career, this is startup 3, but I think when I was a kid, I was always trying to figure out how to make a couple of bucks doing something in and around technology.
Aren't we all?
Different kinds. Yeah, of course. We're all here now. It wasn't, I guess when you did it before the year 99, it wasn't as easy and not as accessible as it is today. But my background, born and raised in Northern California, been in and around the technology industry since age 6, just always drawn to what innovation was happening in computers and software. And, I think my fascination going into college was always with the idea that I would love to be able to work in the tech industry. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. But when I got out of school, I got a job in San Francisco with a bank, and the bank's clients were all tech companies. And I thought, oh, this is my ticket to go get closer to the industry I wanted to be in. And, since then I've been steadily and surely making my way to not only the tech, but also into starting companies. And Samba, the company I'm running now, is my third venture-backed startup endeavor. The first one was in fintech. The second one was in digital media. And this one also, I guess you could say, is digital media and over the top.
Where did the name come from? I used to live in Brazil, so samba is near and dear to my heart, but I don't normally think of Brazilian music and TV in the same vein.
Brazil does have some relevance. I'm also drawn to the culture. But when we were thinking about what was unique about our company when we started, it was a way to bring devices together that were in the industry. When you think about television and digital devices and social platforms, the way that the industry behaves is so heavily balkanized and treating these things as foreign elements. And I knew that that wasn't true for us as consumers. And so what I wanted to do is bring some harmony and rhythm to how these devices connect and how the business models will ultimately merge over that connection that we could create between the devices. And so Samba was sort of the analogy in my mind of what was the most sort of aligned rhythm that you could create between two things. And so there you go.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I've been complaining about the weather here and told somebody just yesterday that I'm ready to move back to Brazil, where I used to live and love the beaches there. But what is the problem that Samba TV specifically solves for brand advertisers and marketers today? You alluded to it briefly earlier in the last question, but I'd love for you to go into a little more detail today as to how they might utilize Samba TV.
Well, I'll make a couple of points on that. So yeah, I did get into the cross-platform measurement problem, which we can talk about. But I think that it's fair to say that TV, represents a massive amount of our time and attention as a consumer. Like, there's an incredible amount of interest in what new shows are coming out on streaming and legacy platforms. It's a massive amount of our attention. It's also a very large percentage of the media budget to reach those consumers, but it's also the most poorly understood relative to all other forms of advertising.
Amen.
And so in a very fundamental way, we're trying to change that. And part of the benefit of being able to bring TV up, the ladder of understanding, is that it merges quite well with an overall cross-platform necessity that advertisers have to retransform their business, to sort of address the way consumers live rather than the way that the industry has operated for the last 70 years. And so I think the idea of integrated media planning, integrated media measurement, or what we call omni-screen measurement, is really just bringing the industry up to the way consumers actually behave in the wild.
I could not agree more with everything you just said. But when you look at how to solve this problem, do you think more of that tends to lie with the brands today or with the agencies in particular? Because it's a lot different, even segmented with a lot of the agencies, because so many agencies are so digital marketing savvy and so few are savvy really in the TV and video landscape. It's something I speak about all the time at conferences, really understanding the convergence of TV and digital. Last time I saw you in person was at the TV of Tomorrow show, and everybody there was a TV advertising person, yet really to understand, well, what connected TV's role is. And a lot of this is understanding how those two play together. And I'm often trying to understand on my own behalf, really where that knowledge gap is. And I'm curious where you see that with, what are the kind of parties that need to educate themselves more?
It's a good question. I'd say we face the worst kind of innovator's dilemma in our business, because it's not just the innovator's dilemma that Clayton Christensen was talking about, where your past success becomes an inhibitor, impeder on your future innovation. It's that's true while your partners and customers are also facing that same inhibition or impediment. And so when you're stuck, your partners and your customers are stuck. Like, how do you unstick yourself and the ecosystem all at the same time? Like, it's not easy. And there's some brilliant people across agency, brilliant people in publishers and media companies, as well as in the advertising community, doing some really hardcore, rigorous data science and innovation around what you can do to address this problem. But how do you bridge the solution with the past? That's a really tough thing to do. And so, the ones that are least motivated are the ones that are obviously winning on yesterday's yardstick, and are not so motivated to kick the apple cart. And then, you have some external forces that are sort of forcing their hand, whether it's the digital first platforms like the Facebooks and Googles are out basically selling on last touch and are getting disproportionate share of the budget today, that are basically now forcing the winners of yesterday, are saying, if you don't innovate, you're going to die. You're going to lose even credit for what you do deliver intrinsically and inherently. And so I think that's really what is moving us forward as an industry, is that the new breed are no longer like rounding errors. They're like the lion's share of a budget. And so, what we're seeing today is that the agencies they're sort of symbiotically linked to, the major publishers out there, and, they're moving the world forward because, the last thing we want is for every media plan to have one vendor on it. And what do you need an agency for at that point? And you don't want Silicon Valley to gobble up the entire industry. And you definitely don't want to be, diluted by a methodology like less touch that's, basically rewarding the wrong players in the ecosystem. So I think I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that the future is good. We have new data sets to work with. For an over-the-air broadcaster or a cable network, you're no longer, relying on small panels to try and capture the value of your audience, to describe the richness of your audience. You can actually use large data sets today to be able to segment the audience in much more granular ways, to be able to compete with digital platforms in precision, and then ultimately prove performance, the same way that digital platforms do. But in this case, instead of using a flimsy methodology like last touch, we can start to figure out, well, who was the first touch? Like, how did the consumer even find out about this product? And I think that's where, the excitement is among not only our partners on the agency side, but even on our publisher side, where they can feel like they can start to get a fair share of the budget.
Yeah, I love that. Like you said, it's, they may start on Google and they may end on Google, but what actually drove that conversion might be that they were watching something on TV or on social media or something else, and then they go to their Google machines. It's just that, Google did such a brilliant job of what they've done with Google Analytics, that it always rewards them. So I'm always a champion of seeing companies like yours provide better measurement. And especially, I think the challenge has been, you mentioned something about history. When you look at 2020 in particular and how our habits changed dramatically, we're consuming media in a totally different way than we did every year before. So you cannot argue that 2019's indicator was a good indicator for how to plan and build and, not pivot for 2020, or you would have failed. That data isn't good for 2021 as we start to see more things open with people getting the vaccine and people starting to travel and things like that. So it's going to be a continuous challenge. I'm just hoping that people can use the right kind of measurement, including what you're helping them solve, so that they can plan out their media buy a lot better.
That's the goal. That's the dream. I think we're all sort of existentially linked now to get this right. And I know that, like what's been helpful is the fact that the digital first platforms, have led the way in getting us all smarter about data and attribution. But, the digital first brands, the clients, didn't even exist 10 years ago, have, put a lot of competitive pressure on the brands built in the 20th century, and have become acquisitions. I mean, look at what, companies like Unilever and Procter and Gamble have started to do from a innovation and an M&A standpoint. I would have never expected a subscription razor company to be an acquisition target, for a big CPG brand. But these brands have been built with really rigorous measurement at the core of, how they work. And that's really training the industry to evolve, which is great.
Well, another problem on top of just being able to optimize on this is we've got the problem with walled gardens, and then really trying to figure out beyond that how to manage the frequency against any one in those gardens. Let's say that somebody does touch me 4 or 5 or however many times on Facebook, and then 4 or 5 through a connected TV device or whatever. How do we start working towards solving that problem to where I can figure out, as a marketer who's spending money on this, where to start putting my money? How should I look at measurement to help me do a better job of figuring out that frequency cap ratio?
It's a great question. And, I think it's a certain amount of devotion to truth that it's obligatory for every brand to basically say, we're going to follow the money and we're going to measure everything. And, we're going to spend more where we have proof of performance. And, if someone wants to sit out on an island and, sort of isolate from measurement and cross platform, like they're not going to
Good
get
luck. Yeah.
the budget,
Yeah.
like you just got to reward transparency. And, like there's some platforms which are must buy. And I think if enough clients basically exhibit the same demands of, we need to be able to measure the spend, I think that that's an influential voice. I think we all got to hit our quarter. We all got to make our numbers, and it doesn't matter how big you are. Like right now, it's a really important moment for the major brands to make that a requirement of doing business.
Yeah, this next question is sort of a hard one for me to ask because I spend so much time devoted to attribution. But do you think we're over measuring or attempting to over measure too much in TV? You see this happen all the time where it's a guess, but now so much of it is because we know there are new measurement capabilities. It could also send us down the wrong rabbit hole with how we act on what we're measuring. And I've been thinking about this a lot with how much is measurable. And then you can explain that to the CFO, for example, may not always be the right long-term solution. It may just be the one you can measure the best, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I have maybe two views on that. Well, first of all, have you ever sat in front of your television and seen the same Geico ad 30 times and decided,
100%. Yeah.
okay, so then the first part of your question is no, we're not measuring TV very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no way that that's a good thing for the brand. It might be good for the broadcaster, but it may not be. In fact, we have data that actually proves this is bad. This is bad for everybody. It's bad for the brand. It's bad for the broadcaster, although they're capturing some revenue. It actually drives people away from the network too, or from the streaming platform, which has the same kind of frequency problem. So that's true. That like we're not measuring TV enough. But on the other hand, what we're replacing legacy measurement with, in certain cases, I've seen isn't much better. Like for example, if you say, okay, we're moving past panel measurement that can't do cross-platform and we can't do frequency and reach optimization. We're going to replace that with smart TV data. And while I feel what it feels like an innovative and smart thing to do, if the answer to that is you're replacing panel data with one brand of television that's sold through primarily like one retailer that appeals to one demographic and is only one TV within the household, you've just thrown out one bad thing and replaced it with another
It's
bad thing.
exactly right. You just explained it better than I was trying to articulate the question.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, this is shockingly prevalent right now.
Yeah.
Because every innovation group has said, okay, we're going to go get the Costco brand television because they're selling data to everybody. And that will be our new source of truth. And that is not the right answer. Or, and there's other things that are going on too from another brand. But, like the point is that it takes diversity. We need truth. And America is diverse. Every country around the world has uniqueness. One brand of television, smart TV, one room in the household is not a source of truth. If you want to move the ball forward, it's not that you throw up panels. You take what's useful from panels, you combine that with what's useful from smart TV. And guess what? Like set-top box and the cable companies still represent 80% of the country. So to say that set-top box data doesn't have value, that doesn't have truth somewhere in that data set is ridiculous. And so I think we tend to fall in love with the shiny object because it's just there and it sounds different. But I'd put your data science team to work and really scrub whatever it is you're doing, because we want to move towards, we want to move away from the 1950s. We want to get rid of panels that were small and replace them with panels that are much, much bigger and much more representative of today.
What have you seen, at least from a measurement standpoint, of how 2020 in particular looked differently from previous years? Because on top of just being a normal political year where people consume more, they consumed a lot more TV because of the pandemic. And then they also started consuming a lot more movies on twofold, one with Netflix, and then two, as the HBO Maxes of the world started releasing a lot more direct streamed video. But when you try to digest everything that we look at from a measurement standpoint, I'm trying not to say, do we take 2020 and throw it out with the baby in the bathwater, because although we had a lot of things start to converge with more media and more measurement capabilities, it was just such an obscure year. And I'm wondering, to that same point, how should marketers and advertisers working at these agencies start to really interpret 2020 to make better decisions go forward?
Yeah. So Kenneth, I'm going to share my opinion on this. I'd love yours as well, but this is a big question as we go into 2021 in the future. But I think there's a lot of aspects of 2020 which are an aberration and hard to argue would be reflective of the future. And then there's some aspects which we don't expect to reverse. So maybe I'll try to get into both. Linear TV for new production for sports went off the air in Q2. Like that's not a normal thing. It was we saw this in our numbers that people shifted their attention, away from prime time and the typical day parts to daytime because they were home. They needed something to be focused on to divert from the craziness of what was going on in the world. They, needed something that their kids could be focused on as their schools were shut. Like there's a lot of things that were showing up in the data which we don't see as quote unquote normal or persistent. But in the process, what we saw was that people were turning to their catalogs of on-demand everything in their connected TV and finding a lot of choice, a lot of things that, were, helpful as there wasn't anything new on linear. The on-demand catalogs became really, really relevant to people, to be able to go look back at things that maybe you hadn't seen in a while, that are evergreen and perennial in their appeal. And so the connected TV catalog and on-demand, both through ad sport and subscription, were really, really popular. Once you get trained on having access to that kind of catalog, it shifts consumer behavior in what we believe are very permanent ways. These are not people who say, "Oh, I love to have everything at my fingertips. I can't wait to go back to appointment television." Like that's not an outcome we expect, and we're measuring that very closely, ourselves with our data, but also for our clients who are, basically making a decision this year of how do you shift your budget? How do you plan your budget to address the consumer as, they behave in 2021 and 2022? So we're watching that very closely. What did happen in the second half of the year is that sports did come back. We had an election cycle. We had gripping headlines in and around what was going on in with criminal justice and a social movement that was basically built around something that happened in 2020 that I hope we will address as a society. But news for the election and what was going on in 2020 was a huge category, and of course we lost the Olympics. So like that also feels like uniqueness of 2020 that we don't expect to persist going into next year, because you can only handle so much news before it really starts to drive you crazy. What we saw towards Q3, Q4 was that, basically right around November is when news consumption peaked. And then people started to go back to connected TV options. And in the holidays in particular, that behavior that we saw ensue in Q2 really became normal, in that linear TV took a significant dive relative to connected TV, where people wanted to be spending their time, during the holidays when they're with their families.
Where do you think we'll get from a data set standpoint? You mentioned this earlier. If an advertiser wants to reach me, what's the near to long-term future of being able to reach me or anybody else, somebody within a household, in order to break down some of the walled gardens that exist across the social media channels, the search channels, and TV?
This is an area where Samba has been uniquely successful relative to our competitive set. We're the only TV data company on the smart TV side that has managed to find a measurement model that works for Google. We work pretty closely with Google and their ad stack, for their entertainment clients. We're doing it with other walled gardens, including Twitter, with Snap. We managed to connect with Catalina, which has a massive amount of shopper data. We're tearing down these walls, and it's because we have to be intellectually honest about how we're constructing our data sets, how we normalize, to make them representative and truthful. And we're not just selling the data because we have it, but because we think it can be of value to our clients and to the publishers who want to be able to address the TV audience today better than we've been able to in the past. And so, while there's other data sets out there, there aren't any that are as widely integrated as Samba at this point, with linear platforms like Disney and Hulu, who are selling truly cross-platform packaging and measurement, with Samba's data as an input to that stack, as well as, the major walled gardens that I mentioned earlier. So these are things that are non-trivial undertakings from a data science perspective, from a methodological perspective, that take years to prove. And when you're done, then what you can see is that, that we all can play nice, because we all want the same thing, which is, advertising that doesn't piss people off and makes free content and free services more available in the future than they have been in the past.
Well, Ashwin, what do you do for fun? Do you watch a lot of TV since you're in the TV business?
That is the question I always ask our new people when they join the company, because that's what we bond on around here at the company for sure.
So you're on a shark's perspective. You're located near the water in California. What's your favorite kind of shark?
I watch a lot of shark videos. I don't know. I didn't know you were so into it, Kenneth. But like growing up, I always thought the mako shark was the most fierce and fascinating in its speed. But for whatever reason, my Instagram feed is like populated with massive amounts of great whites. I think it's because there's a woman on there that's interested in preserving shark habitats, and so I get a lot of recommendations from her and her cohorts.
You're not talking about Ocean Ramsey, are you?
Ocean Ramsey, that's the one I follow.
Yeah, she's been on my show. She's a friend, lives in Hawaii, but every time I go out to San Francisco, I go out to the Farallon Islands and dive with great whites. It's a passion of mine. So it's a special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting, important questions you're going to be asked today?
Okay, go for it.
All right. Number 1, HBO Max or HBO?
I mean, HBO Max for sure.
All right. Number 2, Samba question. Caetano Veloso or Gilberto Gil? And if you don't know either of those, that's okay.
You didn't see the wall behind me. I have a tenor sax on the wall, so I'm going with Gilberto Gil.
Of course. He's one of the best concerts I've ever seen in Recife. It was like 20 years ago, but I love Gilberto Gil. All right, this is for somebody that lives in Oakland, and I'm sure it's a little bit upsetting since you don't have the Raiders anymore. But Ray Guy, Hall of Fame or not Hall of Fame?
I'm going to pass on that one.
Okay. Number 4. This one I never understand on any of the connected TV channels or streaming services, why it's still so popular, but Friends or Seinfeld?
Friends.
Oh, I don't know. We may end this interview early. No, number 5, and the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or
If it was Curb or Seinfeld, I would say Curb, but not. Yeah, sorry. Curb or Seinfeld would be Curb 10 times out of 10, but Friends or Seinfeld.
Seinfeld wins them all. So the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, you could talk measurement and TV all day long, but let's get to something important.
If you're serving up some chili with the cornbread, then that's all I need to know.
Good man. So Ashwin, where can people find out more about you, Samba TV, and do some research on what you guys have to offer?
Samba.tv is our domain. Samba_TV is our Twitter handle, and Ashwin Navin is my Twitter handle personally.
Awesome. Ashwin, again, it's been an honor. Thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective.
All right. Thank you.
So there was my conversation with Ashwin Navin, the CEO and co-founder of the team building the future of TV data and audience analytics at Samba TV. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, as Ashwin said, it's the most poorly understood relative to all other forms of advertising, and that's so true about TV. I just listened to another podcast and heard a panel talking about TV measurement and addressability, and it was uncomfortable for me to listen to some of these smart marketers not articulate this well. And as I thought about it further, TV is special to me because of my background working heavily in this industry. But TV is special just like Instagram or Twitter or any other channel might be special to you. But whatever the channel is, building out that right integrated media plan with the right measurement is rarely done well, and it doesn't reflect the way consumers behave in the wild, which is part of the problem the smart folks at Samba TV are trying to solve as well. Second, so I've talked about this before, but most media models are broken, especially when you look at how people have consumed media completely differently over the last several years, whether that's from cord cutting, pandemics, consolidation of media players, connected devices, etc. So how do we unstick ourselves from what we've been doing, but bridge a new solution with the past? I like Ashwin's take on innovating so last touch and small panels aren't the yardsticks you used. Last click should never be, you've heard me say this a million times, it should never be even though it's a better painted picture. Walled gardens are painful to climb, and we've just simply got to do a better job so that all parties are happy by creating and rewarding more transparency. Third, with measurement, we often move to what is the clearest numbers that we can see and derive answers from data that we have. And as he reminded us, and I'll paraphrase, it really takes diversity in that one brand of TV sold from one retailer, for example, should not be the sole source of truth just because it may provide you what you think is the best measurement. We've got to leverage many data sources, take what's useful from panels, larger panels especially, and see the data more clearly when looking at more data sources. Not easy, but we'll get there. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. I'm so thankful for every listener. Espero que você tenha dia super boa. Senhor Tubarão is out. Ciao, Brazil. And join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.